Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Contrarians. We have another awesome special Dark Horse album edition for you today. This is our series where what we do is we go through a pick from a band that's not necessarily the best or not necessarily the worst, somewhere in the middle, or maybe they are closer to the top or the bottom. And we kind of give a little bit of a background on why it might be a little bit of a Dark Horse album. And then we go around to each of our special guests today, ask them what they think of the album, why they like it, if they're for or against it, and what they rate it out of 10. We give you a consensus at the end, what we gave it out as a whole out of 10. And that's basically it. So today's album and topic today is Genesis Duke. How's everybody doing tonight?
Excellent.
Good.
Ready to roll.
Yeah, good to see everybody here.
Ready to talk some semi-futuristic prog.
There you go.
So we have some awesome patrons here today. If you want to join any of these discussions, you can join us over at Patreon. We also have a Ko-Fi if you want to support the channel without having to subscribe on a monthly basis. And then we have a TeePublic where we have t-shirts, and that link is in the description. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just run through a little bit of research that I did. Not much. I'm going to let the pros talk about this album today. And then we'll go around and I'll start picking from people. So Duke came out in 1980. It reached number 11 on the US charts. It was certified platinum and had 3 singles: Misunderstanding, Turn It On Again, and Duchess. Turn It On Again charted the highest in the UK at number 8. Sea of Tranquility ranked the Genesis albums and put Duke at number 8. His number 1 was Foxtrot, but what he had to say about Duke was, Pete says, Behind the Line, Duchess, Misunderstanding were good tracks. So there's a lot of really enjoyable tunes, and they still have some Genesis prog. Calls himself a big fan of the album Duke. Best Ever Albums had Duke at number 6. Selling England by the Pound came in at number 1. Ultimate Classic Rock had Duke at number 11. And said, this album marked a major turning point for the band. It occupies a perfectly balanced place between Genesis' proggy past and their poppy future. They were really just beginning to take a more accessible turn on tracks like Misunderstanding and Turn It On Again, but there were still plenty of prog elements on board to satisfy old school admirers. Number 1 on Ultimate Classic Rock was Selling England by the Pound. Here's a couple of quick user reviews. One person said, Genesis, best album of the 80s. While it is still a bit of a mixed bag, it still has its moments. The hidden sweet, Behind the Lines, Duchess, Guide, Vocal, Turn It On Again, Duke's Travels, Duke's End is prime Genesis, and the song Misunderstanding is actually a really great pop song. The rest doesn't do much for me, though. Another person said, I know for some, this is where Genesis took a turn to pop sellouts, but I don't see that. I hear a band that has evolved, not better or worse, just different. So that's the tiny bit of research I did for this. I'm going to start passing it over to you folks, and you let me know if you're yay or nay and what you give it out of 10. Why don't we start with Bicyclelegs?
Well, here is my copy of Duke. Now, I'm a little bit different from a lot of people getting into Genesis in that I did not get into Genesis with the Peter Gabriel stuff. The first Genesis I heard was actually Abacab, which is the album that came after this. I would have been about 10 years old at the time. In fact, I probably would have heard In the Air Tonight before I heard any Genesis. So I'm not one of these people who is like a Peter Gabriel onlyist. Definitely not. I definitely have a lot of time for quite a bit of the Phil Collins era albums. And this one is probably my favorite of the Phil Collins era albums. I agree with what one of those reviewers that Marco was quoting earlier said, whereas this is very much a bridging album, I think, between their proggy past and going into the more mainstream kind of music that they would do. But I think that the songs on this album are just wonderful top to bottom. I don't agree that it's only certain tracks that are good on this album. Behind the Lines is wonderful. Duchess I really like. Guide Vocals, a lovely little bridging piece. But then you get into Man of Our Times, which is the first of Mike Rutherford's solo songs on this album. And I think that's one of the best songs on this album. I think it's a wonderful song. Misunderstanding is a good pop song, but it's probably one of my lesser favorite songs just because it's a little bit too simple. Heat Haze is Tony's first sort of real proper solo song, although Guide Vocal was a Tony solo as well. and I really like Heat Haze. That definitely has a feeling of the older Genesis, sort of Wind and Wuthering, and then there were three sort of feel to it. Turn It On Again, wonderful single, but not straight pop because it's in a weird time signature, or at least part of it is in a very weird time signature. I think it's in like 11/4 or something weird like that. Alone Tonight is the other Mike Rutherford solo song. It's not a bad ballad, but it's not one of the stronger tracks on the album. Cul-de-sac is the other Tony song, and I think it's wonderful, really dramatic, really got that wonderful sort of feel to it, like a kind of a shorter version of something like, what is that song? One for the Vine. It's really got that dramatic sort of momentum to it. Please Don't Ask is the best Phil song on this album. It's a heartbreaker, completely rips my heart open every time I hear that song because it's so personal and so, just heartbreaking about a sort of broken relationship. And then you get into Duke's Travels and Duke's End, where they really go for the proggy stuff, mostly instrumental. Top to bottom, I think this is a really good album. It's definitely a top 10 Genesis album for me, and it might even be a top 5. I don't know. I haven't done my Genesis album ranking yet, but this one's definitely going to rank high. I think it's a really good album. I would give it a 9 out of 10.
Wow, good ranking.
Okay.
So we got a 9 on the board, and I'm calculating everything, and at the end we'll have a consensus.
Okay.
Are you ready to go, Martin? Do you want to go next?
Sure. All right. My thoughts with this album, I already did a regular Contrarians episode where I raved up and down about this as my favorite Genesis album. And it's kind of funny. I mean, this is a bridge album, but I find what happens with this record is that you do get a little bit more of the futurist sort of cutting edge synthesizers added to the whole thing, but it's still the stadium rock of, and then there were three more or less. It's almost like a slightly less proggy, slightly more poppy and accessible version of that, rather than, I don't think they get even more commercial as time goes on. I think Abacab is a less commercial album, and I think Genesis is not particularly a commercial album. And then they kind of find a way to mix a new kind of commercial in with things after the success of Phil's solo career. But having said that, this is one that has a lot of ties to Face Value, the first Phil Collins album, right? And as Bicycle Legs mentioned, that the heartbreaker on here is Please Don't Ask. And this is that whole situation where Phil was trying to move to Vancouver with his wife to save his marriage. And then that doesn't work out. And then he moves back. And oddly, they're recording this album at Polar Studios in Sweden, where both Tony and Mike did their solo albums right around this time. But yeah, so Behind the Lines reminds me a lot of And Then There Were Three. I mean, granted, And Then There Were Three is exactly 2 years earlier. It's March 78 all the way up to March 80 here. But I find this a pretty similar album. I don't think they've changed a whole heck of a lot. I've always said, and I was playing it in the car driving around today, mailing books. I played Abacab again, and I just love that drum sound and the drum performance on Abacab. And here it's like Phil is about 60% towards that. So he's kind of getting there, but he's not there yet. So all the gated stuff and the doodads and and lots of and programming and things like that are, well, there's not a lot of programming on Abacab, but there's a little bit. But I find this is exactly a bridge album to that. But like I say, I think it's actually more commercial than Abacab. I love the closing prog thing on here. And like you say, Bicycle Legs, Please Don't Ask is a complete heartbreaker on here. Turn It On Again, I love. That reminds me of Abacab. It's a little more up-tempo and forceful. Misunderstanding, to me, it sounds like 10cc crossed with Styx. It's in 3/4 time. Turn It On Again, you talk about the time signature and that. I think this is one where a drummer would more refer to it as not so much in an odd time signature, but it's one of these that rolls like a 4/4 but drops a beat kind of thing. So it's more like a 4/4 but dropping a beat idea, right? It just boom, we missed that, we're back into it, kind of thing. So I think it has a pretty good groove to it as well. But yeah, there's quite a bit of mellow stuff on here. Alone Tonight, ornate proggy ballad. Guide vocal, of course, is mellow. So yeah, I'm quite into the record. David Henschel, the last one he's going to produce. I don't know if I said that already. The graphics are almost like something that makes you think it's more new wavy and futuristic than it really is. I think this really moves the band away graphically from the prog thing, and it kind of psychs you out and makes you think it's even more so. But I honestly think it's just a tiny step beyond, and then there were 3, and it's not 2 years beyond. And I like I say, I think it's closer to that album than Abacab. So I'm going to give Duke. I'm going to give it a 7.5. Although I would definitely I'm going to go 8 because I love the complexity of it. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is going to be really high for me. That's got to be second, but this would be top 4 or 5 for me as well. Funny band though, for me, I play these albums over and over again and they never really sink in, and I never learn my Genesis that well, except for, Abacab and Genesis and moving forward. So there you go. I'm going to go 8.
Wow, nice. Some high scores so far. Good job. Why don't we throw it over to Pete? Pete Jones, take it away.
Well, thank you. Nice to see everybody again this evening. I'm going to put my old man glasses on here for a second. And my camera, sorry, it's got that autofocus thing. And oops, there's my son. I love this record. My favorite period of Genesis goes from Trick of the Tail through Abacab. That's my go-to era. So Trick of the Tail being my favorite of that lot. As we've said, I think one of the beautiful things about Duke is that sometimes there's the misconception that overnight it went from Peter Gabriel's super prog to all of a sudden poppy, and there wasn't anything in between. Well, there was quite a lot in between, and the transition was very gradual in my perception from Trick of the Tail through Abacab and further on. It was a track here, it was a track there. There was still enough to hold on to from the old stuff. They just didn't completely jump ship and just throw everything over the side of the ship. One of the things I looked at compositionally with this is that, first of all, we've got Phil adding writing contributions that he really didn't do prior to this record. And even the material that they were smart enough to realize that may not work for Genesis, they allowed him to keep, and obviously went on his first solo record, and they weren't threatened by that. And he did his thing, they did their thing, and they kept the compositions that they thought would work best for them as a group. The other thing that is interesting is of the first side, if you're doing LPs, the first 7 tracks, it's in 6 different keys. And when you write songs from a keyboard, it's very, very different than if you write chords from a guitar or riff oriented. They come off very, very different. Yeah. So it gives a really good variety of tonal qualities, different keys, different contrasts. They're able to modulate to different things. And it's not, I'm in E, I'm in A, I'm in G, and A, and E, and, like a guitar band has a tendency to be. So I really like that as well. But I think one of the greatest contributions here and why this album is so transitional is a week that Phil spent rather depressed in Japan during this sequence where he grabs himself a Roland CR78 drum machine. And once he got a hold of that, Duchess is the first song that he used that program drum machine. And as we know, popular music, just like other things, is a copycat league. And all of a sudden, these loops and these built-in drum patterns started to show up everywhere. Games Without Frontiers, Hall & Oates were using it. Blondie was using it in the beginning of Heart of Glass. It's just everywhere. Even Bob and Doug McKenzie used it on Takeoff. So, I mean, there's a reference for something of importance. And he clearly went further with that on his solo record. And, the adding of engineer Hugh Padgham, if I pronounce his name, I never get it right.
You're right.
And when he came in and they discovered the gated sound that Martin was talking about, and all of a sudden all bets were off, and Phil's drum sound just went to a whole nother level. And, from a drummer standpoint, that's almost as good as it gets. So, I mean, it's got soft, very emotional, melodic songs. I think they're very rich. They're well orchestrated, a lot of deep Tony Banks keyboard. But I think the thing that impresses me the most on those when I go back and listen to this is how strong Phil's singing is. It is very, very rich and thick and very, very powerful, and a surprisingly really high range for a lot of people who don't really think it's that high. It's crazy hard to sing. And you get through that, plus, you know, the songs like Misunderstanding and things like that are pop, yes, but they're still rich and they're lavish and they still have things to hold on to. So I really like the record. I'd probably give it an 8.5. I'll go 8.5 because it's probably it's my ties with Avocab for my second favorite within that stretch, and for different reasons because they're different compositions. But I'll go 8.5 on that. I think it's a tremendous record.
Nice, great job. That was awesome.
I was actually going to say when I was doing my bit that one of the things that I notice about this record is that I really think that Phil came on in leaps and bounds as a singer on this record. Like he always had a beautiful voice on those earlier Genesis albums that he sings on, but he really got some power into his voice on Duke, and he carried that through into the later records.
Well, and I think the songs that they carried over, especially to the commercial release of Three Sides Live, those songs translated really, really well live, and they had a little more power. You've got fuller instrumentation on it, but those stayed in the set for, quite a while, and it's a testament to how strong those songs were. And, so, I mean, that's a good referendum on how well the material was, I think.
Nice.
This is shaping up to be a strong record for Dark Horse. I'm going to throw it over to Grant next.
Yeah. Does this sound okay? Because it's breaking up on my end. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. It's kind of I might have to unplug and plug back in. Genesis was never one of those bands that I was a big fan of back in the day. I mean, they played all their stuff on the FM rock radio and all that, and I appreciated it to a certain point. And that kind of later in life, I kind of really grew to appreciate them to the point. And I think that I would say that this album's probably my second favorite. And believe it or not, the Genesis 1983 album, my favorite. I mean, that's probably polarizing. I'll probably get all kinds of hate mail because we were talking the other night. Genesis is a polarizing band. Either you're on Peter Gabriel's team or you're on Phil's team. And most people are on Peter Gabriel's team. But I think the pop stuff is absolutely brilliant. When they write pop songs, I would almost say like Misunderstanding or Follow You, Follow Me. I could listen to those songs over and over, never get tired of them. I like all the pop stuff because I think as songwriters, you could write all this prog stuff all day and noodle around, but to write a really good pop song that stands the test of time in that Beatle realm, and I'm not saying they're as good as the Beatles, but I think they really found themselves when they could start writing pop songs, and damn good pop songs. Whether or not what the Peter Gabriel people say. Don't forget, Peter Gabriel went pop too. He did the So album. If that wasn't commercial, I don't know what is. And that stands up with any of this stuff. I seem like I've gotten off track, but I just wanted to say, I think this stuff is just phenomenal. Turn It On Again's a great song. The production sounds great. It's Tony Banks playing keyboards. It sounds like Tony. He's all over it. I think it's some of his best stuff. And Phil, his vocals, like, was it Bicyclelegs? Or were you the one that said you thought that Phil's vocals were great on this record?
And Pete, they both said it. Yeah.
Or Pete, someone said it.
Yeah.
Totally agree. I think this is probably some of Phil's best work. And his drum sound, like Martin said, 60% there, 70% there, but you can definitely tell it's Phil playing drums. He's such a great drummer. Mm-hmm. I know I'm coming off like a big fanboy now, but I love this record. And I love the 83 album because to me, that is, I don't know, I love it. Mm-hmm. And I also like Abacab real well. I look at this album and Abacab as like, you know, part one and part two, because I think they're very similar. They're not that far off. And I do agree with Martin to saying that, you know, almost this album and the 83 album, not as commercial as this album. But I love the way this sounds. I think it's well recorded. I wish I had a real critique about it, but I would give it an 8 out of 10 as well.
All right.
Wonderful record. And it was perfect because this is the only album, I think, that really solidifies. They cover the pop sensibility and the prog sensibility and combined it perfectly. This is the only record because even though, you know, you've got Abacab, but it's great, but this one solidifies it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know why anybody wouldn't. I don't know how anybody could dislike this record, even if you're a Peter Gabriel fan. But you know, they're out there.
I think people associate
all the hate mail. I'm ready.
I think people associate it with Abacab more so because people like you get into these album covers that are so similar, right? And even Invisible Touch and what's its name, the other ones as well. You get into this minimalist, almost drab. You know, they're trying to be tasteful and down, you know, low key about it. But I think I
got to fix this real quick.
I think just because you got the two white albums, they also get associated together a little more. So,
but you know where I think the drum sound in on Duke is getting very close to what they would get with Abacab, and that it's going back to the song that I was mentioning earlier, "Man of Our Times." Mm-hmm. The drums on that song are huge.
Yes,
yeah,
I agree.
All right.
And don't worry, Grant, you're always on track.
Well, I had to plug back in. Now I can hear. It was getting all distorted. I don't know what it is. Weird.
All right. Cool.
I'm going to throw it over to Todd to take us home. So, Todd, tell us if you're yay or nay or what you rank it out of 10, why you like or dislike it.
Oh, I am most definitely yay. I wanted to say something about what Grant brought up about how, you know, about them Genesis transitioning to pop music. I used to have a recording of an interview with them right around the 83 album, and one of the reviewers said something about them transitioning to the pop. The interviewer said that to something about transitioning to pop music, and Tony Banks answered and he said, "We've always made pop music, you just never played it." And Phil Collins makes a joke about it and says, "Oh, we got to separate these two." But and then Tony starts talking about Counting Out Time, and he starts mentioning songs from the earlier era. And they were like, "We were trying to do this all along, and we just got better at it as the years went by." But my situation is similar to Bicycle Legs. I remember when Duke came out and I saw a poster of it in the record store, and I thought, I was already into Yes and Rush in a big way by that time. And I thought, Genesis is a band that I'm going to like, and I've just got to get started with it. But I didn't hear any Genesis until after I bought Face Value. So that's about when I started. And I think whatever that was, 11th grade, I think. And but anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the songs that don't get talked about very often on Duke. Behind the Lines, Duchess and Guide Vocal are great. They've come and gone from the set list, but they've been pretty consistently played. Duchess was played on this most recent tour. And but I want to talk about Man of Our Time some more, even though we've already talked about that. That I think that is a remarkable song. It's easily my favorite Mike Rutherford penned Genesis song. And you were talking about the drums earlier. Throughout most of the song, there's almost not a rock and roll beat in it. There's like a syncopated thing that happens with the bass drum, and then a couple of whaps on the snare drum, and it's like this pattern. And you almost it goes into the chorus, and even then it doesn't really start sounding like a rock song. And then the last time they repeat the chorus at the very end, it goes into this full force 4/4 Phil Collins rock beat, and it's almost like they made you wait through the whole song to get there. And I think it's a brilliant song. Bicyclelegs said just about everything there is to say about it, but I love it. Heat Haze, a misunderstanding is great. I remember when the album came out, I was not, or when I first heard the album, I was not that crazy about Misunderstanding, but it's one of those songs that once you are with it for a while and you realize that not only is it a good solid song, but like Grant said, you don't get tired of it. Heat Haze is interesting because Genesis, their lyrical content evolved over time, and like when you think about Heat Haze being a Tony Banks song, Tony Banks' lyrics up until that point, and a little bit after too, they're very I don't want to insult them because I like them. They're very good, but they're elegant and kind of stuffy in a very British way. And this album is where you start to transition to the Phil Collins way of being more direct about, you know, ballads or love songs. But Heat Haze, when you hear it, you think, oh, it sounds something more like what was on one of the things, you know, one of the songs from, and then there were three, but you don't, you kind of think, okay, well, there hasn't been a song like that yet. So that's good that there's one like that. Turn It On again is great. I love that the time signature that it's in, and it starts something that they did a couple of times later on in their career. The best example of it I can think of is Keep It Dark, is where it starts and you think, when you're hearing it for the first time, you think you know where one is. And then when this, like in the intro, and then when the song actually starts, it's like a switch up, and you're kind of like, oh, okay, well, so that's where one is. And so I think little tricks like that are what make some of these songs so enduring. And you know, little clever stuff like that is what is part of why you don't get tired of hearing them, because it's still a little bit challenging every time you hear it. Yeah. As far as Alone Tonight is concerned, there's a really great story that I heard just recently where Phil Collins was talking about how when the album, just before the album came out, they had a meeting with the record company, and the record company executives said, okay, so the first single is Alone Tonight. Okay, very good. Everybody have a good day. And Phil was like, whoa, wait a minute. He was like, if you put out Alone Tonight as the first single right after Follow You, Follow Me, it will kill us. We'll be typecast. It'll be terrible for us. And so they nixed that idea. And I don't know if Alone Tonight ever came out as a single. I don't think it did. It didn't show up in Marco's stats, so I don't think it ever did. But I like Alone Tonight a lot. It's very simple. Alone Tonight has a lot of space in it, which is odd for a Genesis ballad in a good way. And the bridge doesn't even have a guitar solo in it. It's like two bass notes. It's just like very sparse for a Genesis ballad. And at the end of it, there's this really beautiful Tony Banks counter melody that really is the best part of it, I think. Cul-de-sac is probably, I always try to decide what my favorite Tony Banks track is, and I go back and forth between Cul-de-sac and One for the Vine, and I think it might be Cul-de-sac. The bridge in Cul-de-sac goes into it changes keys really dramatically, and it goes into this really simple Rutherford solo, and it's really beautiful, but it's great that it's simple, because at this point, you know, Rutherford is not the greatest guitarist at this point, but that guitar solo is so effective. And then the key goes back down to where it was, and they go through the chorus one more time. And then it goes to this other transition to the end where it changes keys, I think either 3 or 4 times. And very quickly, like within the course of a couple of measures. And then it kind of goes into this kind of double time thing with the drums. And that whole, the last minute of Cul-de-sac, I think, is just absolutely brilliant. And people don't talk about Cul-de-sac enough. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that, because I think it's a really great moment. And I think it's Tony's best Genesis song. Please Don't Ask. Everything's kind of already been said about that. It's really beautiful. It's really different from anything they'd ever done. And then when you get to Duke's Travels and Duke's End, it's kind of like that's kind of like just gravy. at that point, because, it's kind of what people want from a Genesis album, instrumental parts and a, something relatively proggy. And it's kind of like, by the time you get there, you're like, great, this too. Excellent.
Mhm.
I'm going to, this album is tied for first place. And this album, and as far as Genesis albums for me, this album and Wind and Weathering are kind of do this, and they move back and forth. But I'm going to give Duke a 9.5. And the only reason that Duke doesn't get a 10 is because it kind of makes you feel like it's supposed to be a concept album, but they sort of ditched the idea of the concept album. So you kind of feel like, oh, okay, well, look at that. This must be an album about this guy. And then it's not. So I think that they made the right decision by doing that, by taking the suite and splitting it up over the album and putting other songs in. But it does kind of give you a feeling like maybe this was supposed to be a concept album and they switched gears. Also because they were offered 3 Phil Collins songs and they passed on In the Air Tonight. And I would have liked to have heard In the Air Tonight with Tony's keyboards. Phil did a great job in his bedroom with his keyboards, but Tony would have made that song really scary and menacing, even more so than it is. So 9.5.
Thank you. Wow.
Good job, Todd. That was really cool.
We've got an average score of 8.6.
Nice.
So I think we're consensus is favorable on Duke for the Contrarians. So why don't we go around now? Give me your favorite Genesis album, and if you want to plug anything, go ahead and plug it. Or if you just want to say hi to somebody, you can give a shout out to somebody. So why don't we start with Pete? Do you have anybody you want to plug? Anything you want to plug? And what's your favorite Genesis album?
No, my favorite Genesis record is Trick of the Tail. I think from top to bottom, it's simply perfection. There's enough prog, but I still think there's melodies everywhere. And it may not be more pop-ish, if that's what we want to categorize it, but I just think it's a perfect record from beginning to end, especially with the pressure that was on them at the time to deliver something. And I thought they did a tremendous job, and that's the one I go to first.
Nice. Grant, favorite Genesis album? Anything to plug?
Genesis 1983, favorite.
Awesome. Todd. Sorry.
No, doing a discussion with Peter Kerr tomorrow on hard rock supergroup. So we're looking at Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, Rainbow, and Uriah Heep, and we have to pick one member representing each band to form a supergroup.
Cool. Rock Daydream Nation.
So we're doing that tomorrow. So that'll be, there you go. So we're doing that tomorrow, and that'll be out eventually.
Very cool.
So I might as well plug it. It could have already happened. Who knows? But the only thing I got to plug.
More than me.
Todd, favorite Genesis and anything to plug?
My favorite Genesis is probably Wind and Wuthering, and Trick of the Tail is also very high. And the 3 of them kind of battle it out. I want to say, though, that I actually also really love the self-titled album from 1983. I think that when people think about that period of Genesis, because it was on the radio so much, they don't really think about how unique those songs are. They're really different and almost weird, those songs, in the best possible way. And like everybody, and when I remember when that Shapes album came out, everybody was talking about how they hated That's All, and how That's All was a terrible song. And as an adult later, now that I've grown up and learned a little bit more about music, That's All is an amazing song. And it seems like it's really simple, but it kind of isn't. So yeah, I just wanted to say that since Grant likes the Shapes album, that I also really do like that. And it's probably in my top 5. And I'm going to also be on that same episode of Rock Daydream Nation about the hard rock supergroups. And some of those bands I'm relatively new to, so I've been cramming the last couple of days. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Bicyclelegs, favorite Genesis album, anything to plug?
Yeah. Having said that, I'm, sort of started off with the Phil Collins era. Probably my 2 favorite Genesis albums that swap between my number 1 are Selling England by the Pound and Nursery Crime. I love Nursery Crime because that was actually the first Peter Gabriel era album that I ever listened to, and I fell in love with it instantly. Plugging stuff, I have my own channel. It's simply called Bicyclelegs. You can search for it on YouTube. My last couple of videos, I did a studio albums ranked on Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I did a review of the new Tears for Fears album, The Tipping Point. And this week, I'm looking at doing a new episode of my In Defense Of series, where I take albums that the critics really hate and actually say they're not so bad. And I'm going to be looking at Total Devo by Devo. And I'm also, if I can, I don't know if I'm going to have time, but I may also be doing a review of the new Marillion album, An Hour Before It's Dark.
Very cool. Thanks, Bicyclelegs. And Martin, anything to plug? And what's your favorite Genesis album?
So yes, it's definitely Abacab. You can go look at that whole episode on that. And martinpopoff.com for the books. I've got 7 left of the Judas Priest visual biography, but I'm getting more of that and the UFO in. I do have the Yes with the new cover. Yes 2 is going to print soon, so that's the 82 to 2022. Later this month into early next month, I'll have my first proper book of the old style that I used to do with lots of words, album by album chapter. It's going to be called A Dream Evil Dio in the 80s. And I've got a very lavish David Bowie book that I should be getting next month. The podcast, did I say that? History in 5 Songs. That's up every week, everywhere you get your podcasts.
Very cool. Thanks, Martin. And for the Contrarians, you can like and subscribe us on YouTube. We've got lots of content coming out now. It seems like we put out a couple of videos a week at least. We also have our Patreon. If you want to come and join these discussions, you can join us over there. At any tier, we'll get you onto the chats. We also have a Ko-Fi or Ko-Fi, however you pronounce that, if you want to support the channel without subscribing on a monthly basis. We got t-shirts. Feels like we're doing everything nowadays, so keep an eye out. We got some cool stuff coming out soon, and I guess we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody. Everybody did amazing tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Good job, guys.
Great show.